Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. Let me tell you about an amazing sponsor who makes this show possible. I hope that you'll take a look at Drips, the founders of conversational texting, where they use conversational AI to help you reach your customers where they're most responsive, and that's on their phones. And working with major brands like 3-Day Blinds, Liberty Mutual, Credit Repair, and Gainsco, Drips is leading the way for some of the biggest brands in the world to improve engagement rates and outcomes for their prospects and customers. And now back to the show. How do we use culture and commerce to get people to adopt behavior as marketers? Culture today can be such a landmine for a brand tomorrow. Many marketers aren't used to those relationships that extend beyond personas. So how should marketers lean into the culture that can help them develop relationships with our customers? Dr. Marcus Collins is a clinical assistant professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, as well as the head of planning at Wieden+Kennedy, New York. Marcus is a super guy I've gotten to know for some time now. And on this episode, we'll discuss bridging the academic and practitioner gap of marketing, the culture of marketing and identity congruence, information and intimacy, data and insights, perspectives, where we get our news and information and how it shapes our worldview, Sasha Fierce in the Beyonce business, Marcus in the X Factor, Eddie Murphy in Delirious, Swedish culture, Wolverines, Sharks in Hang Time, and a lot more. So let's tune into a doctor of marketing with a doctor of shark whose PhD is pretty hungry and determined on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us a little bit about your background and your career today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Kenneth. I think of myself as a one who bridges the academic practitioner gap. I have one foot in the world of academia, being an assistant marketing professor here at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. But I also run strategy at Wieden+Kennedy, New York. So I put ideas in the world as an advertiser, put people in the world as an academic. And that provides me a unique perspective, I think, with regards to how we come up with ideas that not only move business forward, but uses culture as a vehicle to do such.
Elaborate on that, because I remember reading that on your profile and your background about how you're doing that from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer that culture is the governing operating system of man. That is, culture dictates what is acceptable. It dictates what people like us do. And as Emil Durkheim puts it, that people act in concert with people who are of the same culture in an effort to promote social solidarity. So when people like me do something like this, I do it also. So for a brand, that becomes a really powerful vehicle to get people to adopt behavior. That, oh, people will buy, or people will visit, or people will eat, or people will go, not because of the value propositions, which hopefully are parity at least, but they'll do it because of their identity congruence. So culture becomes a really powerful way to drive commerce. In fact, my doctoral research was done in a field called consumer culture theory. And that is how consumption and culture are inextricably linked. And if we can then, as marketing practitioners, use this connection that happens between culture and commerce to get people to adopt behavior, which is our job as marketers at its core. So I'm a marketer by trade, but I didn't start off this way. I actually started off studying engineering. I was a materials engineer, so I went to school for an undergrad. And while I thought that polymers were super cool, I thought polymers were kind of dope, that these carbon chains come together and create novel things that we use, like pens and glasses and the like. I didn't see myself doing that for the rest of my life. And my parents, in their wisdom, my mother's an academic as well. She's like, oh, wait till you get into your major. You'll love it when you get into your major. And my second year, when I was in my major, I was like, I really don't want to do this. So I took some music theory courses to offset my failing GPA, because I was a musician as a kid. I played piano in church and sang and went to jazz band and whatnot. And I fell in love with major sevenths. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to be a songwriter. And I went home and told my mom and dad I want to be a songwriter. They said, you must be smoking crack. There's no way that's going to happen. So I finished my degree in engineering. After I graduated University of Michigan, College of Engineering, I went into the music industry, did a startup that was doing okay until it wasn't, because the music industry sucks. Went back to school to get my MBA, and then ended up going out west to do partner marketing at Apple for iTunes, managing our relationship with Nike Sports Music, and some college marketing efforts. And it was right around that time that I ended up meeting Matthew Knowles, who has a daughter named Beyonce. And he's like, let me get this straight. You're an engineer, you started a music company, you work at Apple, you have an MBA, and you're Black? Like, dude, who are you? You're not real. You're a unicorn. It's like, I'm real. He says, well, you should run digital strategy for Beyonce. And I said, yes, sir, you are correct. I should do that. So I ended up running digital strategy for Beyonce. This is in the I Am Sasha Fierce days, single ladies days, which is like an awesome time to be in the Beyonce business. There's never a bad time to be in the Beyonce business, but in particular, it was a great time because she was making this huge transition to go from Beyonce to Queen Bee. And then from there, I ended up moving into advertising and been there since, being at Big Fuel, spent 4 years at Translation, Steve Stout's agency, building the social practice there, launched campaigns like Cliff Paul campaign for State Farm, moved the New Jersey Nets to Brooklyn to become the Brooklyn Nets. I launched Bud Light Platinum for Bud Light, launched the Made in America Music Festival for Budweiser, then moved to New York to run what we call the Connections Kitchen at Donor. And now I'm at Wieden+Kennedy as the head of planning in New York office.
One of the disabilities I know that you suffer from also is SEO, in that you personally were not a runner-up on the X Factor 5 or 6 years ago with some guy when I was Googling you to get some more stuff. I mean, obviously we know each other, but I was trying to get some more stuff, and I pull this up and there's Marcus Collins, the singer, who was a runner-up on a show, and then he bought the URL at the right time. So
he did it. He had the right people in place, because
nobody will never hear of him, but they'll hear of you. So
Marcus Collins, he's the guy that comes up, and plus he has like a 6-pack that I wish I had. So he stays winning.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, maybe there'll be somebody with a bigger, 2-liter than what I carry right now. They Google me. But one of the things I'm interested, especially not only from a marketing perspective with what you do, but also as a professor teaching, what I'd love to believe these young minds who are open to everything. Not always true. And a lot of adult students, I'm sure, as well. But a lot of times when this happens, the way we look at culture today, it can be a landmine for a business and for how we market, and what's appropriate today, even when meant innocently, can really get you into a lot of trouble, say 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now.
That's true. This is the gift and the curse of culture, in that culture is contextual and it is time bound, in that what's acceptable today may not be acceptable tomorrow. I mean, I grew up watching Eddie Murphy, loved Eddie Murphy, Raw, Delirious.
Yeah.
I could quote those movies like forwards and backwards. And I remember going back to rewatch them maybe a year or two ago before COVID, and clutching my pearls the entire time saying, you can't say that. Like, this is so wrong. And I didn't even find it as funny as it normally was because of these new frames. And that's the thing about culture. Like, culture is this constant negotiation and construction that we go through with people who are like ourselves, based upon these exogenous shocks to the system that happens in the world around us. And I think that when it comes to marketing, and maybe just in our normal lives in general, we tend to have a narrow view of what culture is. We're like, oh, what's in culture? As if culture is a monolithic, or is that culture is just sort of what's popular. But that's actually quite irresponsible, if not just wrong, on how to think about what culture is. I borrow from Raymond Williams, who's a cultural theorist from back in the day. He said that culture is a realized signifying system, which essentially means that culture is the realized meaning-making system. It's the way that we make meaning of the world. And what things that meant something yesterday necessarily mean the same today by its very nature, right? Like, my wife said the other day, she's like, oh man, that's the bomb. And I was like, yeah, and it's 2001. Like, what are you talking about? Like come on, like, that's not the kind of that language doesn't have the same meaning, in that it's not contemporary enough. Which means then, for marketers who want to benefit from the power that resides within culture or through culture, it requires marketers being very, very close. You can't jump in it today because, you may miss what it means tomorrow. But brands who are part of the culture, they actually, whatever the culture they're interested in, they're close to it the entire way. So that while they said something 3 years ago, it's like, well, we're not on that anymore. We have moved, we have evolved with you, as opposed to we're just jumping in today and then jumping out.
The reference to Eddie Murphy is brilliant. I was just thinking about this recently. I was talking to a friend of mine just yesterday about the stuff I used to say when I did stand up decades ago. I could never say that today.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even offensive. It's just, Eddie Murphy's an African American, and he wouldn't say the same stuff. I
That's
think
right.
of these people like Andrew Dice Clay and Don Rickles, Dave Chappelle.
Yeah.
It's amazing how they would be labeled something. And the fact that you brought up Eddie Murphy, and I need to go back and watch Delirious just to,
so good.
I don't think he could fit in that red leather cool suit he had either for the Raw video, but
that's right.
But still, the thing that I find interesting is having lived in a lot of different cities, spoken a lot of different languages, lived in several foreign countries. I've been able to, luckily, to travel the world. It's been a godsend for me. And most time I'm thinking about it from where I get to dive with different kinds of sharks more than anything. But I think about this from a reference with culture about how most people haven't had that opportunity. So they get contextually what they find, unfortunately, just on social media. Then it becomes stuff that heats up at the moment. And I don't know how to expand everybody's perspective, because there's not a way to necessarily, you can listen to people on podcasts and learn from others, but social media, again, is not the greatest place to really experience culture. And so for brands that are trying to fit, not only if they're a global brand, it becomes an even more complex problem, because most other cultures don't go through, they don't have any kind of shared history of what we've gone through.
That's right.
So what kind of guidance do you give those?
You're so spot on. What you're speaking about is intimacy, that, you can read about Sweden, you can watch Swedish movies, but you don't know what it's like to be a Swede until you go and you touch it and you visit it, right? Like, I can look at New York from an aerial view, but I don't know New York until I walk the city, right? You got to be close to it. So, the communications literature refers to this as public pedagogy. That is, the media that we consume helps shape what we consider to be reality, or at least our view of what things are. Is it accurate? Probably not, but it provides a shorthand. So, if before I went to Dubai for the first time, in my mind, Dubai and Saudi Arabia were the exact same thing. Like
not at all. Yeah.
Like I thought they were the exact same thing. So when I got off the plane, I was like, I feel like I'm in Europe. This is completely different.
They're both 200 degrees.
Exactly. But it's not what I thought it was, because the media I consumed helped shape what I thought reality was going to be. But you don't know until you experience it. So to your point, relying on social networking platforms as the only way to sort of create frames by which you see the world is probably going to give you only one side of it. Now, the discourse is powerful. Like, don't get me wrong, discourse that happens on social networking platforms are really good. But for brands who want to be close, you got to go visit. For brands who want to connect with a particular group of people, like, you got to go chop it up with them. You got to go be a part of them to really understand. And this is an issue that I think marketers run into, because we have so much data at our disposal. We've talked about this before. So much data at our disposal, we feel like we know people, but information and intimacy are two totally different things. If you have a meeting coming up, you go, let me check on LinkedIn right quick so I can know who that person is. But you don't know them until you actually talk to them. And the same thing goes for marketers. We don't know people until we actually invest ourselves in it, until we immerse ourselves in the culture, which is the equivalent of going to Sweden, as opposed to I just read about it.
You do know what it's like to be somewhat in Sweden, considering that in your winters, it's also negative 200. So you're getting the same.
But here's the interesting part about that. So I was in Sweden last, I think in 2018. And I'd never been to Sweden in winter, never before. It was my first time being there in the winter. And I was so shocked, because they don't, at least in Stockholm, they don't plow the streets. There's just snow. There's just caked up snow on the streets. I live in Michigan, and anytime it snows, we're like, plow this thing as fast as possible so we can drive. But people just drive on top of the snow like they have sleds on their on their cars. It was wild, especially as a Michigander, where we're very, to your point, very much used to the snow. It's those little small things that make all the difference in the world. I mean, there were parents that were pulling their kids, literally pulling their kids on sleds to school. I was like mind blown, because in Michigan, it just doesn't happen that way.
Well, it always looks a lot cleaner now you think about it in most of Northern Europe where they get so much snow. But I remember being in Michigan one week, in Minneapolis another week, in New York, all within 3 weeks. And there was a snowstorm that had come through during that period, sort of from Midwest to the East. And the snow was dirty. It was plowed over, and it sits there for 6 months until it melts, and it just looks dirty and nasty. And then you go to Sweden, and it's, like I said, white snow with people pulling their kids out on sleds.
Unbelievable.
One of the spot on points I think you have that is such a problem for marketers today, and I think so many people are remiss and don't understand this, is that marketing for the most part doesn't get close enough to actual people.
Yeah.
And I constantly am shocked at how much distance there is and lack of intimacy. One of the things that I've often brought up at conferences that probably makes sense only to me and nobody else looking at this graphic. But I remember walking through a store, I want to say it was a Walmart, and it was the picture frame aisle. I took a picture of the picture frames all set out on the shelves, and because I had this, epiphany, and put it on a slide. And I told people, instead of just posting pictures of yourself and your pets and your hiking trips, that you put up in your cubicle, take a picture somewhere, metaphorically speaking, of a customer, and get to know your customer, really get to know them.
Yeah.
And I find so often that people have created such a distance, and we haven't really figured out how to bridge that distance for most people. And I don't know how much of it's culture, how much of it's social, how much of it's not an age thing. It's just marketing as a practice doesn't get close enough to actual people.
I think because it takes a lot of time. And I didn't realize this, or at least I realized this before. I didn't really come to appreciate it until I got on the academic side of the world, where we interrogate everything, rigorously interrogate everything, and like try to suss out meaning. And when we look at something, we observe something, what is it standing in for? We do that with great rigor on the academic side, but it also takes a long time, like 3 years on one study. That we don't have that sort of luxury in the world of practice. And because the timetables are so short and we're trying to meet the next deliverable as practitioners, we're kind of like, what's the fast way to do this? I mean, that's why we look at people as demographics as opposed to who they really are, because getting to know people take a long time. I mean, it takes you a long time to get to know your wife. Like, it takes time, but that's how relationships are formed. And I feel that because it takes time, we try to find the most efficient way, but there's no such thing as an efficient relationship, not a meaningful, efficient relationship. It takes time, short, lightweight interactions over a period of time. And as marketers, we typically don't have that much time. We got to meet our numbers by next quarter, or, we had a new launch and the thing needs to have this much penetration or market share in X amount of months. You don't have time to go take your time to go meet people, get to know people. Again, that's a folly, which is why at Wieden, at least, we're spending a lot more time like slowing down to get to know who these people really are.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, though, was this bridge with students, and knowing that you're also teaching at a university level, the discussions you have with people today. What do you see as the value really for what colleges and universities provide to marketing students to help move them forward? I'm a big proponent of a college education.
Sure, yeah.
But at the same time, there's so much out there that people sort of feel like they can learn on their own from an online standpoint.
Yeah, I think that what the technology has provided for us is a disruption to what we consider traditional, like ivory tower academy. That is, academics are meant to acquire knowledge and disseminate it, right? That's our job. We rigorously study a phenomenon in the world, and we get all that information, then we disseminate it through our publishing and through classroom. We teach it. But I think that is a framework for yesteryear. I think for me, at least, the most powerful thing that I can provide in the classroom is perspective, a way of seeing the world, right? Because I believe that things aren't the way they are, things are the way that we are. And the way we see the world informs the way that we behave in the world. So if I can provide students with a perspective, then whatever information that they get, they can read on or online, they can get from Coursera, they can see in YouTube, these things that they'll constantly continue to grow their repertoire of information. But these things will all be filtered through a perspective to help them make meaning of the world. So my pedagogical approach comes from a gentleman by the name of John Piaget. And John Piaget would say that people learn when they're in a state of cognitive disequilibrium. That is, when the worldview that we have is disrupted. We go, whoa, what's going on here? And then we allocate all our cognitive energy to put the world back together again. And putting that world back together again creates a new universe for us, for which we operate. So the classroom experience for me is, how do I break people's worldview, give them the tools to help them put it back together, but do it collectively with other people who are also experiencing this broken worldview, right? This broken schema, as psychologists describe it. So the classroom is not just a place where information is disseminated. The classroom becomes a curated environment where people learn, where people are putting the world back together again. And I give them some information to do that. I also give them exercises to do that kinetically, right? They can arrive at it through doing, but I also provide the proper stimuli, at least I think, the proper stimuli that allow them to get there through discourse, through talking about it. Like, well, I didn't see it that way. I saw it this way. And then, oh, I get it now. And classrooms are at their best when they're designed for that kind of learning, not for a place where information is disseminated, because that can be easily done through the World Wide Web more cheaply and probably more bespoke, because I'm looking for the things I'm specifically looking for as opposed to marketing in general.
I mean, somebody that went from engineering to marketing, you're a perfect example. I'm sure you pull a lot of the practices from an engineering perspective into marketing, but you didn't need to cover 4 P's of marketing.
I mean, like, I don't remember
class.
anything about grain boundaries from materials engineering, but I did develop a way to think in a very sort of logical, sort of a modular way of approaching problems like that. I learned a perspective of how to solve through engineering. Again, I don't remember hexagonal close packed sort of crystallization systems. I don't remember that. I don't know how to measure sort of tensile testing. I don't remember those things, but it's certainly, I know about networks because of carbon chains. And ironically, I guess not so ironically, that my approach to marketing is all based upon networks and how things are shared between these dielectric ties that connect people, the same way electrons are shared between dielectric ties that connect carbon atoms.
One of the things we've spoken about before, and I know you spoke at a conference where we met about data, and I know we had an offline conversation about it as well, but really it's data-driven insights. And I'd like you to kind of give your viewpoint on what marketers are doing today with data.
So here's the deal. Here's what I call the data paradox, that we have more data available to us than ever before. Reams and reams and reams and reams and reams and reams of data. However, while data has exponentially increased over time, we've only marginally increased our ability to extract insights out of it, extract meaning from it, right? So the data acquisition graph looks exponential, and then the insight graph is just sort of gradually increasing at a linear level. But we're not like super better at understanding people, even though we have more data. Why is that? Because we mistake information for intimacy. So how do we fix that then? Well, the first is that we have to look at people as people, not zeros and ones, which helps us sort of capture what people are doing or what they feel, what they believe, what's going on in their lives. But we got to look at them as human beings, which requires a tremendous amount of empathy. So as we get closer to understanding who they are, using different forms of data, not just zeros and ones, but like from having conversations and extracting meaning out of it, we then have to apply some empathy, right? Some empathy. Like, so how are these people seeing the world? Empathy is very, I think Michael Ventura describes it. He says that this is self-aware perspective taking. I'm going to take my glasses off and put on your lenses to see how you see the world. And by doing that, I can better understand who you are. Because you and I can look at the exact same thing and see two totally different things. Not because the thing we're looking at changes, is that our worldviews are different. Our frames are different, but I don't understand that unless I understand you and how you see the world. And our demographics will never express that, right? Our age, race, gender, household income never captures that, but that's how we describe people. That's what the data provides us. African-American male from Detroit, he's probably going to do this, that, and the third. That's the data says. But like African-American males at a certain age from Detroit, they're not a monolith. But the data doesn't get at that kind of nuance. People do. So the challenge for marketers then is, how do we make meaning of the data? How do we extract the frames by which people live their lives so we can look at the data and say, oh, here's what really is going on here. We use data for validation. We use data for testing. We use data as a snapshot of what's going on. But snapshots are only moments in time, right? They're literally static. We're thinking about the way people make meaning of the world, where people's cultural subscriptions guide how they understand what they see, or how they make sense of what they see. That is fluid and dynamic, which means for marketers that we got to move beyond the zeros and ones and get closer to the human side of things. And that sounds like a bit like, I don't know, it feels like a bit cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason, because they are,
Well, what's your advice then on how to bridge that gap? Because for most people, that's really all they're ever going to lean into is the data only.
Yeah. And that's where the empathy side comes in, right? That's like, hey, I see what the data says, but who are these people? Let me go talk to them. I mean, this is where ethnographies come into play, even netnographies, right? My doctoral research, I only use Reddit data, right? But I know this community really, really, really well, because I invested myself, I immersed myself in it as if I were a part of the community. And by the way, my research is about cultural contagion and meaning making, how we make meaning of the world. And the idea there is that, like, the closer we get to it, the better we understand it. So how do we get beyond that? Ethnographies, netnographies, using anthropological means, anthro being about people, right? Society, like using these means by which academics, researchers that are outside of the commercial world get to know people. We borrow from that. That's how we know about who we are as a species, is through those means of research. So we should do that too. Not just do it so we can check the box and say we did it, but to really, really, really get at understanding who these people are. And by the way, they're not the persona that you've given them.
Great point. So Marcus, you're in a part of the world that does not see a lot of sharks, but I ask everyone who's a guest on a shark's perspective, because my own personal passion, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh, my favorite kind of shark is it's got to be the great white, because it's the apex predator. The great white is a monster, and it gets super crazy hang time, and yes, I'm terrified of them.
Good answer. I'm always curious too, when somebody has children, I want to know what their answer is also going to be, because it's all over the board. Sometimes it's baby shark is the answer. But Marcus, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
All right, let's do it.
All right. You are teaching at University of Michigan, so this question will make a little bit of sense. Who would win in a fight, Iron Man or Wolverine?
Ooh,
it's a good Marvel Comics, University of Michigan type question.
So I have to go with Wolverine, if nothing else, then like whatever Iron Man dishes out, he'll be able to heal from them, and the his claws will be able to go through the suit at some point. I mean, Tony Stark is just a dude. He's brilliant, just a dude though. And pound for pound, at some point, Jarvis and all of his like technology is going to run out of battery, and Wolverine can just keep going. He's Wolverine. It's got to be Wolverine. And plus, I'm a Michigan Wolverine, so you know.
All right, number 2. It's a Beyonce question.
Yeah.
Single ladies or crazy in love?
Ooh, single ladies.
It's one of the video. I mean, and the parody video with Timberlake. It's one of the greatest.
It is
2 for videos.
Single ladies has so much cultural gravitas because people know what this is.
Yeah.
There's and
then for people that are not watching the video, he's waving his hand.
Yeah, my bad. So. Yeah, exactly. There's the hand wave. There's the we know what that is off rip. But also there's the language. If you liked it, you should have put a ring on it. Like all that came out of the song. Then there's the video that's ridiculous as well. It's unbelievably phenomenal. It's got to be single ladies put a ring on it for sure.
All right, number 3, and you brought him up earlier, so I got to ask Eddie Murphy question: Beverly Hills Cop or Coming to America?
Coming to America all day, every day. Coming to America might be one of the top 10 greatest movies made. It's one of the best, definitely one of the best comedies ever.
I should have asked Beverly Hills Cop 2 or Coming to America 2.
Oh, Beverly Hills Cop 2 for sure.
Yeah.
Coming to America 2 is trash.
That's why I was thinking about this question. Beverly Hills Cop, those 2, 3 was a little rough, but the first 2 were, yeah.
That's the Beverly Hills Cop 2 gave it Bridget Nelson.
Exactly.
So there's that. But yeah, no, Coming to America 2 was so hard to even like accept it, because Coming to America 1 is like, it is a national treasure. Good night. Like, yeah, I go with Beverly Hills Cop 2 versus Coming to America 2.
All right, number 4. One of your favorite animals, Wolverines or owls?
Oh.
And going back to your temple days.
I mean, I suppose an owl over Wolverine. I mean, Wolverine is actually, at least in my mind, they're so like uninspiring. Like you see it, like the little things, like little rodents, right?
But it is the one that provides you a check also. So
that's true. But like an owl looks kind of majestic, and it's, I got to go with an owl.
All right, number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is, drum roll please, biscuits or cornbread?
Ooh, that is actually a really good question.
You should write a thesis on this. Get University of Michigan to give me some money. Let's do a doctoral thesis on this.
Biscuits or cornbread? Oh man, that is hard. That's really hard because biscuits has more. There are more occasions which you can have biscuits. So you can have them for breakfast. You can have them with dinner. You have biscuit with lunch. But cornbread, oh man, cornbread's so classic. I think I'm going to go with biscuits.
Okay.
I feel like I'm cheating on cornbread with that one, but
yeah, really. We both have such a relationship with both of them. So, Marcus, where can more people find out about you, follow your thoughts and leadership, hear you speak at conferences or in a University of Michigan classroom and more?
Totally. You can find me at Mark to the C, MarkToThec.com. Also at Mark to the C across all the social channels there are.
Marcus, again, an honor. Thank you again so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is great.
So there was my conversation with Dr. Marcus Collins, a clinical assistant professor of marketing at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, as well as the head of planning at Wieden+Kennedy, New York. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with him. First, as I mentioned earlier, the way brands lean into culture, for many of them, it's like tiptoeing through a minefield while wearing a blinder. So many make the wrong reference at the wrong time. And as Marcus said, culture is contextual and it's time-bound. What is acceptable today may not be tomorrow. He goes on to remind us that culture is not just popular, it's how we make meaning of the world. So just keep that in mind before you lean too far for the wrong reason. Second, Marcus is a really good speaker, and I've heard him speak about data and insights before, one of my favorite topics because of my own background. Use as much data as possible, but get closer to your actual customers, and don't rely on personas and the data that comes just from campaigns. We need intimacy, and of course that can be hard to scale, but get to know your customers better. As he said, information and intimacy are two different things. Don't rely on only information just to replace the other. Third, love the references as well as to getting closer and how that applies to culture and perspectives and how what surrounds us helps shape our reality. For our example, he said, you can read about Sweden, you can watch Swedish movies, but you don't know what it's like to be a Swede until you go. It's a great point. You've got to get closer to people and their problems and the reason they consider your brand to really experience them. That's a big problem, a disconnect, if you will, that a lot of marketers, especially digital ones, have today. Social media is one way, but it's a surrogate relationship at best. Get to know them way beyond a persona, and make sure you carry a jacket because they get a lot of snow and it's cold there. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Thank you to my sponsor and the team at Dreps. Please consider writing a review and letting me know your thoughts on the show. So I think it's time for me to add a little more culture in my own life. I think I'm going to go do it, though, from 60 to 75 feet below in the water. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.